Do you ever wonder when you lost your innocence? When is it that life became complicated? Because if we don't understand that, we'll never know what problem it is that we need to solve, but why it is that we just struggle to figure things out. And I think that's one of the things that grips a lot of us, is trying to figure out how everything comes together. One of the things that always comes to mind whenever someone talks to me about things that are troubling them, or why it is that they're experiencing stress or duress in their relationships or just in life in general, is that the first question they're always asking is why? Why is it that I was treated this way? Why is it that things are not going my way? Why is it that I can never get this right? Why is it that that happened to me? All of these sorts of things. Always about why. It's never ever about what happened and how it happened, because that's the easy part. What we take from that is then the difficult part. And that's why when someone says, trust your instinct, trust your gut. No, don't. Please don't trust your gut. If you trust in your gut and you don't know what's informing that instinctive reaction that you have, chances are very, very good that you're going to be driven by fear rather than being driven by purpose, driven by insight, intuition, and understanding. And that's the problem, is that all of those things, insight, intuition, and understanding, all of that is negatively impacted by fear. So if you're looking to save yourself from something, to protect yourself from something, then when you trust your gut, when you trust your instinct, you're going to respond in a defensive way. And you're going to look to defend yourself against a perceived attack. And that perception of being attacked is what drives anger, which brings me to another important point, which is the misunderstanding about anger. But hopefully we'll deal with it, unpack that in more detail in another episode. The point is that if you don't know what's driving you, if you don't know what it is that's your primary motivator in life, you're going to go through life struggling to find sweetness, struggling to find joy. Every single time you have a major accomplishment or a major achievement of something or the other, it's going to be like, yay, we did that, and what now? What's next? So any celebration will be short-lived. If you're fortunate, it will last a couple of days. Most of the time, it gets so bad that in the middle of the celebration, after a few celebrations of the same kind, it's like, yeah, great, thanks, but it's just a thing. We just did what we needed to do, or we just accomplished what we needed to accomplish. And it's always a stepping stone to something else, So you're always chasing, you're always looking for what's the next thing. And the reason we keep doing that is because we need to remain relevant. We need to remain influential in our space. We need to have the ability to be able to establish our significance in the lives of those around us. And if we don't know how to do that without accomplishing things all the time, that's where we start chasing again. And then the chase then becomes consistent between our personal life and our professional life and our social life as well. And that's where the attention-seeking behavior comes from. That's where the need for understanding, the need for space and all of that comes from. Because everything just starts piling up and feels overwhelming, and then you start questioning what's the point. So back to the original question, when do we lose our innocence in that way? And when I talk of innocence, I'm not talking of innocence from a sexuality perspective or from a morality perspective. I'm talking of when do you lose your innocence to starting to see the world, or view the world with fear and suspicion, with paranoia, with doubt, with hesitation. That innocence is what I'm talking about. And that innocence is lost a lot earlier in life. And let me give it to you in a slightly different perspective. The one thing that we never ever see is a baby born with depression. We don't see a baby born depressed. But interestingly enough, one of the very interesting insights or observations I came across a while back is that the reason why a baby cries after they're born is because relative to the context of its life, that is the most traumatic experience it's had. And that is what it's all about. It's about context. Relative to the context of your life, how you experience something is going to determine what you take from it and what you expect from the future. And if you're always going to be hoping and praying that it doesn't get worse, that it's only going to get better and all of that, you're always going to be filled with trepidation about, I hope that's the last of it. So coming back to the baby, the one other thing that I always find interesting about babies is that there's not a single parent that will teach their baby how to walk. or that is able to teach their baby how to walk. Because you can't really instruct a baby at that point. So if you can't teach a baby how to walk, it means that the baby learned how to walk by their own volition, by their own effort, their own curiosity, their own need to want to achieve something, right? And that gives you critical insights into human nature, into who we are, what makes us work, how it is that we arrived at the point that we're in right now, and all of that. So when you look at it from that perspective, you start realizing that there's two traits that we're born with innately. And we could probably unpack that further, but for the most part, it's confidence and curiosity. So look how it works, right? You notice that how babies, when they're laying on the bed, a newborn, they're very curious. They're always like looking around, observing, looking at their hands, seeing what happens when they move their fingers, when they move their feet, and then start touching things and getting the sensory perception of what those things feel like and look like and sound like and all of those sorts of things. And that's how they start becoming familiar with the environment. And it's the familiarity of the environment when they were in the womb that shapes a lot of the kind of characteristics that you see in them as babies as well, which there's a lot of research to back that up and to provide more insight into that. But here's the important part, right? When a baby is laying on the bed and they shuffle a bit, and when they shuffle a bit, they see that they moved a bit and they think, hey, that feels cool. So if I can move from there to here, that means let's see if I can move a bit more. And then they shuffle a bit more and they roll over. And as they roll over, they start learning what it is that causes them to roll over. It's a new experience. And every new experience then piques their curiosity even more. So what happens then is that they start trying to move their limbs a bit more, and suddenly they see that they can have a directional kind of movement. So now I can't just I don't have to just roll over from side to side. I can actually roll over and then I can move in a specific direction. And then they learn how to crawl. And then they learn to crawl and they learn how to walk. And when they're learning how to walk, they fall on their face, they bump into things, they fall on their butts. And the people around them are also enamored and like excited about this new development in their child and all of that. And what happens is that they then start laughing along with them each time they make a mistake, each time they fall, each time they fail at something. And those mistakes are not seen as mistakes. It's seen as, let's try again. And eventually they start walking and they become more aware, more self-aware, more aware of the people around them. And at some point, after all of that, they stop being so curious and they start developing fear. And the reason for that is because they start to realize that people are not always laughing with me. Sometimes they're laughing at me. And when they're laughing at me, that doesn't feel nice, because I became aware now of the fact that they're not having fun with me. They think I'm stupid, that's why I got something wrong. Or we start inserting ourselves into what they think of us, how it feels when they respond a certain way. And that's the moment in which we've lost our innocence. At that moment, we became more invested in what someone else thinks of us rather than what it is that we thought of what we were trying to do ourselves. And that's what happens with life. We don't realize when we lost that moment, because it's a time when we didn't really have mindfulness or a real strong established sense of self. So that's how your place in this world feels like it's been shaped. And relative to what you assume to be true about why they were laughing at you, etc., that's what will then shape whether or not you make yourself available to new experiences, to challenges, put yourself out there to kind of be a leader or to be inspirational or to just live your life. So that's when you need to start understanding what it is that you took from your childhood experiences. And please, let's not go down the ridiculous path of healing the childhood wounds and the reparenting the inner child and healing the inner child and all of that. Because I've got one simple question for people that always take that approach. What does healing your inner child look like? And how do you separate who you are now from this inner child concept that they've now come up with? Because this inner child concept, it assumes that there's something that still lives within you that needs to be fully formed before who you are now can be better. It just doesn't make sense. So when we talk of inner child wounds and we talk of reparenting the inner child and all of that, that's just a way of us trying to make sense of things, but it doesn't mean that it's actually a beneficial way of trying to rationalize things. And the reason why this is important as a differentiation is because If we don't understand what it is that we're looking for, we're going to find something that feels right, and we're going to think, ha, I found it. This is what I was looking for. And the only time you realize it wasn't what you were looking for, it wasn't the answer that you needed, is when it fails you at another point in your life. And that's what happens, is that we find answers, we think, okay, we've got this figured out, we continue because we think now we've got it figured out, and we don't pay attention to what's happening around us because we're so focused on having things figured out. And when circumstances change, context shifts, there's new influences and new social changes and world events that happen that disrupts that space of ours. What we had figured out is suddenly a problem again. And that's when the stress sets in. It's like, how many times am I going to have to try and figure this out? And that's where we start then getting into defensive spaces. That's where the anger and restlessness and irritation and frustration and those kind of emotions start rising. And it's also where we start taking more defensive approaches to things, and we start trying to control things, and we start looking for more predictability and things like that. And that's an important point, and I'll point it out to you in a second. So if you're not aware of what drives your gut, please do not trust your gut. Because if you trust your gut without knowing what informs it, you will create problems where you intended to create good. You'll treat people with suspicion, you'll jump to incorrect conclusions, you'll create tension in good relationships, and you'll write people off for all the wrong reasons. So don't trust your gut unless you know what is informing your gut. Now, if you're going to slip into the space of believing that because you know the reality of what they've done and how they treated you and what you tried to do for them and all of this, and you think that's what's informing your gut, the moment you're rationalizing from that perspective, you're already driven by fear. And that's the thing. The moment you're driven by fear, you will be causing more problems than solutions. So how do you understand your fear, and how do you get around this? How do you develop the sense of self and refine that innocence? That's the beauty of life. I saw this in a song that I heard once by Talib al-Habib that says that wisdom is the refining of innocence. And it's refinding that innocence that you lost when you became more invested in everyone else's opinion of you. And you started shaping how you showed up in life relative to what you needed them to think or what you didn't care about what they thought. And the moment your focus is attached to what someone thinks of you, and you then respond from that perspective, like, I'll show them, or I'm not going to care about it. There's a consideration about what they think, and you're already distracted. That's an important point. You don't realize how distracted you are because you think you're being purposeful. But purposeful or being mindful is about focusing on what you're trying to achieve, not on what others think about what you're trying to achieve. But back to that in a second. So when we start looking at it from that perspective, and start to refine our innocence, it means that we have to become more aware of what is informing our opinion of ourselves, right? And what informs our opinion of ourselves is what we have to hold ourselves accountable for. Because we choose what we take from people. Someone can treat you badly, but it doesn't mean that you're going to assume that means that you're a bad person or that you're not worth it. If you believe you're not worth it because they're treating you badly, then that means that you're already struggling with your self-worth. That's why you need people to treat you well. And then if you're struggling with your self-worth, that's when you go into victim mode. Because then you start trying to protect yourself. And that, unfortunately, is the kind of underlying theme across the mainstream mental health space, is that it convinces you you're a victim of something or someone, and then it tries to build you up to be as functional and as protected and as secure and as successful a victim as possible. And that's why you see people starting to wear these badges of courage, saying, I'm a survivor of this and I'm a survivor of that, and I survived abuse and I survived trauma and I survived toxic relationships and all sorts of things. As long as you're surviving something, you're still defined by your experience. And if you want to be defined by your experience for the rest of your life, understand that you're going to be giving up a lot of sweetness of life because you're still focused and fixated and tied to that negative experience that you had. So coming back to healing the inner child and all of that, another common question that comes up is, I'm on my healing journey. And I say, great stuff. What does healing look like? Or in fact, not even what does healing look like. What does it look like to be healed? And usually people can't answer that. And the reason they can't answer that is because you don't know what you don't know. So you might know that where you're at is not where you want to be. You might know that how you feel about life and your place in it is not pleasant. You might know that what you experience in your relationship with your parents or with your siblings or with your children, that is not how you would have ideally wanted to experience those relationships. That doesn't mean that you know how to achieve the opposite of it, the goodness. And that's the problem. If you go through life judging people, judging your parents, judging society, judging your colleagues and things like that, you will be tested again, like I said in the last episode. You will be tested to see if in a similar circumstance, will you be able to do any better than that? And that's because of cause and effect. That's how we create self-fulfilling prophecies, right? So, for example, if you look at a couple, when you're a child, you look at a couple and you think, they suck at marriage. Look how terrible their relationship is. They're always fighting, they're always arguing, they're always insulting each other, they're always putting each other down in front of others, and all of these sorts of things. And you think, I'm going to be better than that. And you set out with good intention, sincere intention to be better than that. All that means is that you know what you don't want. So even when you look at your parents and you think, yeah, my parents sucked as parents, and that's why they're narcissistic parents, and I've got a narcissistic mother or a narcissistic father, and all of these things, and that's why I need to not do that. I'm not going to treat my children that way. If life was that simple, don't you think that over the thousands of generations that came before us, they would have figured it out by now? But they didn't. You know why? Because assuming that you know what you don't want in life is never enough. Assuming that what you don't want in life is going to be enough for you to be able to make the life that you're looking for, it's never enough. You have to know how to achieve what it is that you believe is good, what you believe is going to be better than what you had before, what you experienced before with others. And if you don't know how to achieve that, that's where you're going to be tested. That's where you're going to experience the same kind of emotional demands on you that is going to look different from what your parents experienced when they were trying to raise you, but it's going to demand a similar kind of presence and availability from your side that might provoke your demons that you didn't know you had. Because that's the thing about demons, right? Our insecurities. We don't realize we have it until something provokes it, something niggles at it, something triggers it. And then we feel triggered and we blame the other person for not treating us well and everything else. It's not about whether the other person treated us well or not. It's about whether or not we can self-regulate our reaction to that. And that's why the anger comes in, because anger is a defense mechanism, because anger is a demand for significance. Anger is not something you can manage on its own. I always tell my clients that when it comes to anger, if you're trying to manage your anger, that's like taking the Mentos, throwing it into the diet soda, and then putting your hand on top of the bottle to try and prevent it from exploding. It's stupid. Your question should be, why is it that despite knowing what the Mentos is going to do when it hits the diet soda, why is it that you're still throwing it in there? Why are you allowing someone else to throw Mentos into your diet soda, so to speak? And that's the kind of difference in approach and perspective that we need to adopt when we're trying to figure out life. It's not about how you must do this and how you must do that, and here's an exercise and do journaling and do these things. If you're looking for tools, you're looking in the wrong space. Because again, tools become coping mechanisms. So coming back to refining your innocence is found in your understanding of why it is that things played out the way it did around you. And the biggest trigger, so to speak, the thing that really annoys a lot of people is when they want to complain bitterly about being treated badly, and you ask them to try to understand why someone treated them badly, immediately they go off the rails, because it's like, how can you possibly ask me to understand, because what they did was so bad and so terrible and so wrong. At no point in time are we saying that understanding means that you condone, defend, justify, or accept what they did. But if you don't understand why they did that, chances are twofold. One, you're likely to make the same mistake with someone else, and you'll be exactly like that person that treated you badly, and you'll wonder, how did that happen? Also seen in very common examples of where we promise ourselves that we're going to be better than our parents, and then we one day wake up and realize, like, how did I turn out to be exactly like them? So that's the one thing about not understanding. The other thing about not understanding is that the effectiveness of your response to the situation is not going to be as good as it should be. It's not going to be as effective or as purposeful as it should be. And that's how you end up creating new problems instead of solving the problem that you're faced with. So when you're focused and fixated on how and what and compliance and conformance, you'll get only that. And there's no sweetness in life if you're just complying and conforming and rigidly applying rules and fear-based consequences to encourage right behavior. It's about understanding why it is that despite knowing what's the better thing to do, why do you always find yourself doing something that you know is going to be detrimental? Why is it that you trying your best to raise your kids well, but yet despite your efforts, it seems as if you're not appreciated or you're not respected? Or they're just not taking your advice and they're always wanting to learn from someone else. And then we blame social media and we blame society. We are part of society. And we go into social media to find what we're looking for, not what social media is going to shove down our throats. So again, this victim mindset that we end up in when we became first aware of the fact that people are laughing at us, not with us, that victim mindset, if we don't realize how deeply entrenched that is, we won't be able to overcome it. We won't be able to mitigate the impact of it or the consequences of it. And then we'll go through life believing that we're good people, and everyone is intrinsically a good person. But there's nasty experiences in life that causes good people to do bad things. And yes, we have to resist and challenge and cause them to stop in some way from doing those bad things. But it doesn't take away the fact that they are struggling with their own demons. And if we don't see what their demons are, we won't be able to conduct ourselves in a better way than them. We won't be able to learn from it. We won't be able to raise children that's better than that. We won't be able to raise leaders who are going to have a better moral or ethical grounding than that. So when you demand compliance and conformance from the people around you, that is because if they do, you interpret that as significance. If someone does what you ask them to do and they do it, you assume then that because they're listening to you, that means they respect you. Because they're doing something for you, that means they love you. And that isn't anything about respect or love. It's about conformance and compliance. It's about a transaction. It's about a contract. It's about an agreement. The moment you're establishing your relationships based on those contracts and agreements and unspoken contracts that are social contracts between you and others around you, the moment that is the focus of what it is that you determine whether you're in a good space with them or not, then chances are very good you're going to be causing harm to good relationships for all the wrong reasons. And that's the problem, is that we don't realize the impact that we have on others, and then we judge them for the way they behave towards us. And then we hold them accountable for how they behave towards us without realizing what it is that we did that might have disappointed or hurt them. So that's why labeling and all of this becomes a distraction. So when you realize that as a baby you were curious and confident by default, you'll realize that any fears, any insecurities, any inadequacies that you have now is because you've allowed those insecurities and those inadequacies to shape what you think you're capable of. And that's because of the defense mechanisms that we develop over the years, because we just need to feel safe. And if we can't rely on the people around us, we rely on ourselves. And that's how you become the selfish kind of independent person who tries to be resilient in the face of all of these horrible things that we had in life. Life sucks in many ways, but there's a lot of beauty in life that we don't ever experience because we focused on how life sucks. So the more you start understanding how your defense mechanisms and coping mechanisms that might have had purpose at some point in your life, the moment you realize how that has become your nature, your belief that that is who you are, this is just who I am, accept me for who I am, this is my personality, this is my character, whatever it is. The moment you become defined by that and you expect people to just make excuses for you because you can't help yourself, you're effectively telling yourself that you're not capable of growth, you're not capable of change. And if you are a certain way, if you're narcissistic or if you constantly are a downer because you're always looking for the negatives, and that you expect people to create opportunity for you to just be yourself while they must put in the effort to try and uplift you. It doesn't make sense. It's tiring, it's tedious, it's exhausting when we go through life that way. And the only way to change that is to own what it is that you hold yourself accountable for. And the starting point of that is to look at what is it that you took from your experiences. And when you understand what you took from your experiences, you'll realize why an experience that happened years ago still has impact on you now. It's because it convinced you about certain things relative to how life works and what you're capable of and what your place in it is and who you can trust and what you can trust and all of that. That's what you take from the experience. And then because that experience was so defining, everything in your life then becomes shaped around that. And that's why the survival mindset and the victim mindset is such a terrible thing, because it keeps you pinned in the past. And then you look to like create moments of joy around all of this horrid kind of realities that you're still living with from the past. To be able to meaningfully move on in life, you can't keep focusing on the past. But to be able to move beyond the past, you have to understand why. And when I say understand why, I'm not talking of some idealistic philosophical position about how it is that something played out. I'm not talking of karma, and I'm not talking of fate and all of that, and destiny and it was written and all of that, because it's also very opportunistic in the way we look at things. What I'm talking about is that you understand what is it that might have driven the other person to behave the way they did. Because the biggest takeaway we have when someone treats us badly is we assume that they're treating us badly because of what they think of us. And they don't. Majority of the time, people don't treat you badly because of what they think of you. They treat you badly because of what your presence in their life provokes about their sense of adequacy or inadequacy. So the moment we make a demand on someone or have an expectation of someone and they feel that expectation and it provokes their insecurity because they think they're not going to be able to meet that expectation, that's when it feels to them like you're expecting too much, you're being unreasonable, you're trying to make me look stupid, you're trying to make me look weak or useless or inadequate. So if we don't know how it is that we feel about what it is that people do to us or what it is that they expect from us, if we don't own how we feel about it, we'll then subscribe to the labels and say, I suffer from this and I struggle with that. It's not that. It's that you lack mindfulness, and you lack mindfulness because you're driven by fear. And when you're driven by fear, you're always chasing, you're always trying to make sure that you're relevant. And coming back to what I mentioned earlier about the control, people often assume that control gives us power and authority and all of those things. It doesn't. Control gives us predictability, nothing else. So the question you need to be asking is, why is predictability so important to us? Because if we are in need of predictability, what does it say we believe to be true about our capability? It means that we are afraid of unpredictable spaces because unpredictable spaces might trip us up and we might appear incompetent. We might fail at dealing with it. And why is that important? It's because if we fail at dealing with something, we think that's going to diminish our influence with the people around us, which means it's going to affect our significance. And that is what we all need. We all need to feel significant. We need to feel like our presence adds value or it matters to the people around us. So when you preemptively focus on protecting yourself from that, you start controlling things because you need it to happen a certain way so that you can be sure that you're going to be able to show up in that space in a way that's not going to earn you disrespect, disregard, mockery, ridicule, or at best in a way that's going to earn other people's praises. And that's why when you focus on what other people think of you, you lose sight of what it is that you think of yourself. And that's how it is that you get to know what everyone else thinks of you more than what it is that your opinion of yourself is. And that's how you lose yourself. And then you blame others for how you feel because you just don't know where it comes from. Mindfulness is the absence of distraction. And the fear of incompetence is what distracts us. The fear of insecurity, the fear of insignificance, the fear of not being good enough. All of that distracts us from the present moment. So then when you have any of those fears, insecurities, and whatever they want to call as triggers and all of that nonsense, whenever you have any of that playing in the back of your mind, when you enter any moment, no matter how much you're focused on that moment, you're focused on what is happening in that moment. You don't focus on how you feel about what is happening in that moment. And that's how you're going to then interpret things. If you walk into a room feeling as if you're vulnerable, you're going to look for all the threats in the room. You're not going to look for the opportunities. And if you walk into a room with a misplaced confidence about your abilities and about your standing with the people in the room, you're going to look for all the opportunities. You're not going to notice the risks. That's why you have to be mindful, you have to be grounded, you have to be in a space of almost neutral emotion, but at the same time with a strong belief about your capability, your limits, your way of being able to navigate things. And that's what we lose when we try to control things. And control is such a crazy irony. And I'll hopefully unpack that very quickly before we finish up today. So the reason why it is that control is such a crazy thing is that in order to be able to achieve control, you have to create order out of chaos. But the purpose of control is to avoid chaos. But now you're so focused on the fact that you were able to create order that you're now invested in maintaining that order rather than recognizing that you actually have the ability to navigate chaos. And that's the thing. When we focus on our fears, we lose sight of the fact that we know how to figure things out when we understand the problem well enough. And it's that we lose sight of that causes us to need tools and exercises and methods to cope with life, because we don't trust ourselves to figure it out. And when you don't trust yourself to figure it out, you then need someone to blame when you get things wrong, because they didn't teach me, they didn't show me, that was a bad example, they treated me this way, I've got this childhood neuroses, this and all of that nonsense. It's got nothing to do with any of that. It's all about how it is that we become distracted from who we are because we started fixating on what other people are going to potentially think about us, what they're going to have to say about us, or how they're going to treat us. And when we need them to treat us a certain way, and they don't, and we can't handle that because of what it is that it implies about our significance to them, that's when things get complicated. Life is simple if we don't complicate it with our fears. But fears it's a normal part of life. And when you find you being that fears are becoming debilitating, where it comes to a point where you're overwhelmed by fear, and then the anxiety and the panic attacks and all of that starts setting in, understand that it's because you lost yourself to the projections of the future that you see as probabilities of problems. You're projecting into the future, even the immediate moment after what you're doing right now. You're looking at it and you're thinking, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm not going to be able to cope. I'm not going to be able to function. I'm not going to be able to. That's why you panic. That's why you get anxious. That's why you shut down and you go from fight or flight to freeze. It's all because of what you are assuming to be true about the probabilities that are facing you. Now, if you recognize that in the past, and this is guaranteed true for every single one of us, there was something that happened that was outside of what you expected, and you, because of your need for control, you managed to figure out a way to pull it back in line so that you could continue prevailing with your control over the situation. That's the moments that you need to understand. That's the evidence you need to look for to confirm that you have the ability to navigate unexpected outcomes. But because we're so focused on having re-established control, we see re-establishing control as the most important thing. So when you're going through life, when you're approaching your day, when you're approaching your week, you need to reflect and consider whether what you're doing is because you're afraid of a consequence, or are you doing it because you're inspired by the benefit and the value you want to create with it. 99% of people are the former. 99% of people have a job because they're afraid of homelessness. They're afraid of not being able to pay the bills. They're afraid that if they don't have a job, they're not going to be able to provide for their families, or or have a good quality of life, or things like that. And that's another thing, is that we confuse quality of life with standard of living. So we focus on improving our standard of living, and we think that's automatically improving our quality of life, but it isn't. Because more often than not, if you're chasing standard of living, you automatically diminishing your quality of life because of the amount of stress and the amount of distractions that you introduce because of the improved standard of living. So mindfulness, again, is what is important, and hopefully in upcoming episodes we can unpack what it means to actually establish mindfulness. Here's a hint. One of the things that I can tell you with absolute certainty is that mindfulness is not meditation. It is not yoga. I think I mentioned this before. It is not all of these spiritual practices. Because mindfulness is about your presence of mind in the moment you're in. It's not about preparing for the moment you're going to be in. So, don't confuse situational mindfulness with emotional mindfulness. Situational mindfulness is about what's happening around you, what people are saying, what they're doing, how they smell, how they look, all of those sorts of things. That's sensory experiences. That's situational mindfulness. True mindfulness is about a combination of that and emotional mindfulness, where you understand and you are connected with how you feel about something, and you know whether or not you have a bias about it, so that you can mitigate your bias, your judgment, your predisposition because of past experiences and your needs about what the outcomes are and all of that. If you are mindful about that, you'll have a better chance of not tainting your interpretation of what's happening in the situation with how it is that you feel about what you need from that situation. Now you're closer to mindfulness. And the only way to achieve that is not to practice mindfulness, is to clear away the distractions that were overcrowding your senses when you were trying to focus. So that's hopefully something we can build on in our next episode, and I hope this was of value. And please get the feedback coming and comment, so that I know whether this is connecting or not, and how it is that we can unpack it in a direction that makes more sense to you. Take care, and chat to you again soon.